Hey, you guys. So last night I did an interview with my really good friend Izzie, who is a proud Puerto Rican from Boston. And I'm going to play it for you guys because I don't know, I think it's like his a victory story of when you keep working and keep moving and working hard no matter what. So hopefully you guys learned something. Right. Hey, you guys. So I'm here with my very good, very accomplished friend, Izzie, who is a badass. He's a Puerto Rican who grew up in Boston, and he is sort of like a superstar. He's representing. And I just wanted to sort of interview him because I think he has like some wisdom for you guys, right?
I don't know about
very
that.
wise. I mean, yeah, no, he's kind of, but yeah, no, I'm just kidding. But here is Izzie. So Izzie, let's start out with why don't you describe like where you grew up and give me the setting.
Yeah. Hi guys. My name's Izzy. And if you guys, so I'm Puerto Rican, and my real name's Isidro. But it's really hard for people to say, so
White people.
I go by white people to say.
Mm-hmm.
And some Puerto Ricans, you never know. But I grew up in Boston, in a particular neighborhood in Boston called Dorchester, which is very, very similar to Harlem. I guess would be the same equivalent.
Is it like mostly Latin?
Yeah,
Black?
I think it's mostly Black and Hispanic. So
yeah.
a lot of people think of Boston as being a white city, which is the greater Boston area definitely is very, very white. Harvard, MIT, all these schools. But actually, it's a majority minority city, right? So there's a ton of Black people, a ton of Spanish people, and I grew up in one of the most majority minority parts of the city. That's very, very similar to Boston. The south side of Chicago would be similar as well.
Yeah, okay. So tell me about your like elementary school education and up through like he got to go to a fancy private school, but he still got some solid practical advice.
Yeah.
Don't hold that against him.
So I went to school. I went to Catholic school my entire life until I was in the 7th grade. And the Catholic school was kind of interesting because it was in the heart of Dorchester. And it was a situation where like, all the kids were Black and Hispanic. I didn't even meet a white student until I was 13.
I mean, like, it's like a lot of you guys, right?
Mm-hmm. But all my teachers were white. So even in Catholic school. And then I went to private school when I was in 7th grade, and it was basically all white people all over the place. Teachers, students, everything. So it was a big learning curve that I had to learn when I went. For example, like I used to blast the N-word all the time, like when I was in Catholic school, because it was just around me and everybody spoke like that. But I remember stepping foot in private school when I was 7th grade and knowing right away that, oh, shit, like we can't say the N-word here. And ever since I haven't said it. So just a little bit about me.
Well, I mean, that is not your word. Technically,
yes,
Black people's word.
Yes, but don't tell anybody that. No Puerto Rican that in Boston.
Oh, I
you know what
I
mean?
I'm not. I shan't be telling a Puerto Rican. I'm just gonna keep my white lady mouth shut on that.
But you're right.
Yeah. So tell them like a little bit about. I think just hear like your endurance and your work ethic, and like I think you have been at least like what I see is like you're a very driven, really smart person who has sort of always been like strove to excel. And I think that like being so different from your fancy private school kids growing up, like what was that like to go to school with a bunch of like not just white people but like rich white people?
Yeah. So one of the great things about my life personally that I'm super fortunate about is that I have both my mother and my dad, and they love me to death, right? So any kind of work ethic that I have comes completely from them. And that was really, really helpful. And my entire family, I'm Puerto Rican, lots of cousins, lots of aunts and uncles, lots of friends, and everyone sort of strove to help me out throughout my entire life, right? So my parents always started work really early, so I'd have to get up at 4:30 in the morning until I was 16 and I can drive, right? And I would go to one of my uncle's houses in the morning or my grandmother's house in the morning, and somebody would take me to school, right? It was a community effort.
It takes a village, man.
It takes a village to raise a kid, right? And I definitely had a village, and it was very strong and it's super loving. Even though I've lived in New York now since I was 18 years old, and it's 12 years, of my life. Even when I go back to Boston, everybody's super proud of me and super happy about me, and it's just very, very loving. Like now, all of that was very difficult still because I was not well prepared to enter private school when I got to the 7th grade, right? Even with all the help and the support of my entire family, my entire village, it was still really, really difficult, and that was because I was just way far behind relative to a lot of the kids that I went to school with. And part of like the way in which that got fixed was I was lucky enough to go to a private school that was really, really small. And a lot of the teachers there really looked out for me, right? And helped me and tutored me and, sometimes brought me home from school after my activities when my parents couldn't do it. So my family got extended when I went to private school.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, and also like, not to like make a crippling indictment of the public education system in everything I talk about, but I think like Izzie got really lucky, and like it sort of was like in a lot of ways like you're an exception to the rule because like a lot of kids don't get a scholarship to a dope private school where you receive like, I mean, I'm
incredible
jealous of
resources.
the education that you received.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, damn, like I could have flown with that.
Mm-hmm.
But and like that's I forgot where I was going. Where was I going?
I don't know.
George is distracting me. But so it's hard. And then like how did you not internalize, because like if I like when I was that age, I thought I was really dumb and like did not think I was very smart. Turns out I was just super ADD. But anyway, like I totally like I remember believing that women just weren't as good at math, and like really believing that. And I think to this day, like that's why I don't like math. So like you were dealing with a lot of sort of combating like stereotypes because rich white people don't really know any brown people, and like you were also adjusting to a brand new culture that's really stiff and formal and like all of that. Did you like code switch when you were at home versus when you were at school? Was it stressful to do that?
It was. So like, here's the thing, right? So when I was in Catholic school, so before this private school, I was a straight A student, right? And when I first got to this private school, so in 7th, 8th, and 9th grade, I was nearly failing out. And that was really tough, not necessarily because of like the school sort of having undue pressure upon me, but because I was terrified of my parents, right? And all of a sudden, we're going from like one situation where I was getting straight A's to now getting C minuses, like what we called the gentleman's C minus, right? Where they were just giving it to me so I can pass along, but I was really, in actuality, failing out. And they even called my parents to tell them this, right? And the school said, well, look, he's not doing well, but we're going to do everything we can in order to help him out. And I just leaned into that a little bit, right? And I think one of the key things for me was that I had, even though the whole school was behind me, there were one or two teachers, right? Similar to probably how Allison is interacting with you guys, right? Who really took a concerted effort and interest in my development. And I just tethered myself to them.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I really did. I still talk to them to this day, and this is, 10, 15 years later, right? And I think that's the key, right? That was, once 9th grade, passed on and 10th grade happened, I really came into my own because of their help, right? I'll never forget, there was this guy named Ben Corshane. He was my 9th grade English teacher. He was very new to the school, very, very young, similar to Allison. And he gave me a book, and it's the reason why I wear this hat, the autobiography of Malcolm X, right? And it was the first real sort of, what's the way to put it? The first sort of like sophisticated or intense, intellectually challenging book that I ever read in my life. And I loved it, right? Because I saw myself in Malcolm X a little bit, right? He had a very complicated story. And his story was very, very interesting. And obviously he's a big historical figure who I knew. And I read that and I just blossomed from there. I started reading a ton. I was, when I read a book, my vocabulary wasn't fantastic. So what I would do is, and he taught me this, was that when I read a book that's of interest to me and it's using big words, for example, read the passage, right? And underline all the words you don't know. Write them at the top of the margin, look them up, and then reread the passage. Sounds like a lot of work, but it really isn't when you're really into a book.
That's
right?
true. That's true. And it's also like for those of you who are looking to expand, like get your vocab scores better, that's the easiest way to do it rather than doing like flashcards and memorizing definitions. That way you learn it passively. As a teacher, I wholeheartedly endorse this study strategy. But yeah, so you worked really hard to catch up with all these fancy private school kids who had like a silver spoon in their mouth and like, you know, had like individual movement coaches when they were 3 years old. And like, it's crazy what rich people do with their kids. And so you worked really hard to overcome that. When did you realize that you were smarter than most of your classmates?
I don't know if I haven't come to, I'm going to be quite honest with you guys. In my class, there were 50 kids in my class, right? 15 out of 50 went to Harvard, right? So it was one of these situations where like I dealt
Everybody's
with
smart. Okay.
a really smart group of kids, right? So it's not until very, very recently and within the past couple of years, maybe even within the past couple of months, frankly, right, where I've thought of myself as not necessarily being smarter, but being on the same level as the kids I went to school with.
Okay, I'm just going to interject here because Izzie has this same self-narrative that you guys do, and this is, like, why I wanted him to talk. Because, like, Izzie is humble bragging right now. Like, he went to Columbia, which is, like, basically Harvard, but New York, so better. And he worked really hard, and then he went into consulting, which I'm still not sure what it is. I'm sure he can explain it better, but he's dope at his job, and he's got all these, like, rich white people like clamoring after him, like being like, oh wait, work for us, because he worked harder than every other person in the room. I know you did. I've seen you. That's like all he does is work. He makes me look lazy. It's true. Facts.